The Stack. People, Business, Technology. With Dan Tomaszewski of Everything MSP.
Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here. Welcome to this week's episode of The Stack, where we focus on people, business, and technology. Today, we're digging into something that every MSP needs to think about, your client's attack surface. It's expanding, and if you're not staying ahead of it, you're playing defense with a blindfold on. Joining me is Liam Downward, co-founder and chief product officer at Cyrisma. And there we have Liam. How you doing today, buddy?
Hey, not too bad. Not too bad. Thanks for having me again.
It's great to have you here, man. And life keeping you busy, business keeping you busy?
Life keeping me busy. Yeah, business is keeping me busy. But I'm just a kind of little fun fact. I'm in the place called the Isle of Man. That's very unique in its own right. In a couple of weeks, it's going to be hustling and bustling with a famous road race called the Manx TT, which I'm kind of excited about to see.
That's very cool.
We take it for granted. We sometimes take it for granted, and you don't realize what you have until you don't see it anymore, right? And that is true to the fact, right? So when I miss the U.S. because I'm not there, but I like the Isle of Man and vice versa. So I kind of get the best of both worlds right now. So that's good.
That is awesome. And so we're going to be talking about a pretty critical topic today, and I want to kick it off just kind of starting out with a big picture view. I guess the first thing is, how has the attack surface evolved over the past few years for SMBs as well as MSPs?
It's as the famous question when one of my lecturers told me, how long is a piece of string, right? It's you can never know. But if you think about it, to this day and age, you've got the sprawl of cloud, right? SaaS, right? Because everybody's now moving to SaaS-based platforms. You've got home networks. You've got all these different areas that you're now engaging. We were just with my CEO, we were just going through it the other day, that depending on the size of the organization, you can imagine you can have up to 172 applications. That could be SaaS-based. So you can imagine that in itself externally connected with data and then internal data. And now all of a sudden you've got home networks because of the paradigm of COVID with the hybrid home and office work. So it's basically a stab in the dark sometimes if you do not know how to control what the attack surface potentially could be. And it's the path of least resistance, right? How the hackers get in.
So with this expansion of all those SaaS applications, and let's, be realistic. I mean, we do know that one component of it is, shadow IT. We definitely know that end users mean well. They want to do, the best they possibly can in their role. But with that being changed, what do MSPs need to pay attention to when it comes to that?
Well, it's the mind shift, right? It's because, we were like before, I don't know if you ever heard the term, everybody is the triad, right? The confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? Whereas most MSPs are so focused on the availability that it's kind of like, and I was a culprit of this back in the day when I was an MSP. I'll just give you admin rights and I'll come back to it later and I'll fix it.
Right.
Because there was an app that they wanted to get running that they needed for business purposes. By the time you got back and look at it, they've installed plugins, they've installed this because now they got admin rights. And this is what happens. So you just leave it. You don't think anything of it. But that's what happens, is that it's that new shiny toy. Anytime they go to an event or a doctor goes to a medical I want this software. It's going to help me look like the best thing since sliced bread. So that's why those apps get bigger. You just need to know what type of applications and systems that they need in order to, stop the sprawl. And the biggest thing is I tell people to do is a thing called the emerging technologies group. And people say, what does that mean? I said, it may not be new to the industry, but it might be new to the company. So that means you need to bring in business, operational, and IT, create a committee so you understand the technology that you're bringing in that's going to hit those three key elements. That helps you to reduce the footprint, gets everybody to buy in on it. So when you implement policies and procedures and technology, it's easy to do. But it also does is it gets them to start thinking about acceptable use, business appropriate business applications, and
Yep.
build it out. Otherwise, if you don't, you get that sprawl. I hate to say this, we're all hoarders, right? You can tell
Right.
me if we look at our data. If you look at an IT person's computer screen, they got 55 million icons on their main desktop, and then they have one folder called cleanup, which they dump everything into, and then they start all over again, right?
Right.
Everybody else is exactly the same. Once they see an opportunity to install a plugin that makes them feel like they're being more efficient, then that is what it is. And the
Yeah.
biggest one for Shadow IT is AI, the companionship of AI being involved, especially when you have Gemini, you have Copilot, you have all these things that are there. That itself becomes another inherent risk when they have all these new plugins and things that can happen. So you're no longer focusing just on SaaS, right? You now have all these other things that are people coming into play that potentially can open up and leave data out on the public domain that they weren't supposed to. So all these things start to come into play, and it's understanding the business and sitting down with the owners or stakeholders and saying, hey, what do we need that you need to have to run your business? Everything outside of that, is it a need to have or is it a nice to have? And then determine which side of the fence they want to work on.
It's funny when you talk about that desktop folder called cleanup or desktop items, and we often see that where you might be meeting with a client, so you want to make sure your desktop looks clean, and so you do a quick select all and drag, and then within that folder, there's a desktop items number 2 and a desktop items number 3.
Oh my goodness, that is so true. It's not even funny. If you actually looked at my desktop, I think I'm like down to 12 right now. Desktop 12. It goes back like 10 years ago. It's like,
exactly.
It just compounds overall. And that's the same with apps. They compound, right? Because you've got applications that are 10, 15 years old that people cannot, they feel that they have to have it. Whether that's a business appropriate application, it's they need to have it that makes them feel that they can be successful in the job that they're doing. That inherently becomes a problem. So it's not only about knowing the software, it's knowing the versions. Is it still supported? Is it not? Because these are all attack vectors. Because if the software is no longer supported, that means that it could open up to any potential existing or new vulnerabilities that you're unaware of, because they're never going to get supported and mitigated by the vendor because it's end of life. So all these things that you need to take into account.
So, a lot of folks focus on the outside, scanning the web for, whether it be some exposed ports, open services, and all that. But tell us, why is internal asset discovery just as critical as external scans in today's cyber environments?
Because it's connecting the dots. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I'm going to put a piece of paper in front of me so I can write it out myself as to kind of explain the connecting the dots, right? So you can imagine you're doing your external attack surface, right? You're going out and you put your domain in. The domain goes out and tells you, oh, I've got all these subdomains. Now I associate with them with an actual IP address, any potential PTR records. Do they have any SSL certificates? Are they self-signed? All this kind of stuff. But then as soon as you start performing any network discovery internally, you want to be able to identify, is any of those assets have any binding to those external IPs? Okay. So now you're connecting the dots from internal to external as well. Because if there's externally, if you think from a pen tester's or a hacker's mindset, right? Discovery, enumeration, vulnerability mapping, exploitation. Externally, they found an IP that belongs to a web server that has Apache or IIS vulnerabilities. You go internally, you find that web server, but if you don't know that that's externally facing, you then think, oh, it's just another asset on the inside of the network. So now you elevate that, because now you're able to identify by saying, hey, externally that's associated to this external IP. That external attack surface told me that it's this web server is running on here. It's got these vulnerabilities. Now I'm higher. That's a higher level. Now, as you discover other elements on your network, you want to know what's executive level assets. What are revenue generating assets? So you can start prioritization of those elements. Also, you want to be able to identify rogue assets on the network, because you may not have had that in your inventory before. Let's take, for example, higher education. They have these little silos where a professor may turn on a laptop and say, I want it connected to the internet. And he connects it to the internet, but it's not knowing that it's also connected to other parts of the network. And it's not firewalled. So you're identifying these elements, identifying things that people have brought in from home and plugged in because they see an open port, like, and they start plugging it in and thinking it's okay with the BYOD. So the more you're able to identify, the more you're able to start classifying the risk of those assets, tagging them, prioritizing them, identifying potentially weak ports, vulnerabilities, but then also, like I said before, tagging that and associating that to external IPs, because now you have a two-way vector of getting in. It could be directly to internal. That could be a revenue-generating machine that has potential PII information on it. It's vulnerable. You want to mitigate that. So all these things stop becoming a bigger problem. And as you are aware, especially when it comes to like websites, people say, hey, and developers of this, sorry for any developers feel like I want to offend them. I apologize, not my intention, but it's just what happens a lot of times is that they do a great job in performing externally in performing cybersecurity in all the different realms. But when it's an internal web application, they tend to say, let's lax the security because we're focusing on business and process. It's not externally facing, it's internal. But that also is, it's another lateral movement that if somebody infiltrates the network and sees a website that's easily, exploited, they can hide malicious code in there for days or weeks as people connect and silently deploying this and then have a trigger.
Yeah.
So all these things come into play that you just need to have a bigger picture and understanding what that network is, both internally and externally, and how to connect the dots. As I always tell people, the easiest way into a network is to walk past the firewall. Right. And once you're on the inside, you could be a USB drive. You could be something as simple as things like that. Yeah. You got in, or that's why social engineering is a major factor that people don't realize as a part of your attack surface is the physical human element is still part of that, not just only focusing on the bits and bytes, ones and zeros.
That's a huge component of it. I mean, it's
yes.
We're putting a very powerful tool in front of end users, and and we have to educate them about the ins and outs. I mean, it's a no-brainer, and
Correct.
It's something that cannot be over emphasized at all.
Yeah, and it's like if you think about this, Dan, is this right? Imagine you're the manufacturer, right, and I'm your vendor. Okay. So, and this situation here is that a lot of people don't think along these lines, the path of least resistance, right? So I'm just this little vendor that's providing you, you're part of this, we're part of the supply chain, right? I'm providing you a service or I'm ordering from you. So you allow me to VPN into your network, right? To send orders and do different things. Okay. But you haven't come to me and said, hey, what's your security like? The MSP hasn't said, what's your security like? So now I'm another attack vector. I'm another surface attack process of how weak is my security, that basically I've got all ports open because I've got a simple VPN. I haven't locked it down to your network, that if I get infiltrated, because I'm a small business compared to you, right? You're a big billion-dollar conglomerate. Now I'm going to get attacked first because they potentially know that I'm potentially connected to you, because everybody likes to do this. Hey, I've just signed up a new contract with Everything MSP. We've come into partnership. Okay. They're like, oh, really? Bad actor? Let's go focus on Cyrism as the little small guy connected to Everything MSP. And let's see if we're able to get to you because of that path of least resistance. Because if I try to attack you, you've got this beautiful moat that you put in place of separate security concentric rings, but you've forgotten about this asset connection that was never identified when you were going out and doing your normal day-to-day operational stuff of that connection. It got forgotten. It got lost. It wasn't documented or anything of that nature. Now I get compromised. You get compromised. You go to your cyber risk, cyber insurance. They go, sorry, you're negligent.
Yeah.
Because you didn't do the full vendor risk process on me to make sure I had adequate security. We just focused on the dollars and cents. We had dollar signs in our eyes, right, to kind of make money here. And that was what happens as well, is that MSPs only go one layer deep. They tend to external because that's what everybody does. But the unified attack surface is taking internal and external and trying to merge them together, but then trying to go as deep as you possibly can to potentially look for all these different types of potential attack vectors, because it only takes one lateral movement and then boom, you're compromised.
So let's get a little tactical here. Let's talk a little bit about some of the practical steps that MSPs can take to uncover hidden risks within their clients.
Mm-hmm. So number one, right? If you're doing, say for example, simple, and I'm not going to blurt out tools. It's not about here to talk about cyberism. We're talking about what the best practice is, right?
Yeah.
Let's look at it from a standpoint is that you would actually have a tool that you put on the customer site that basically goes out and performs an inventory. Okay. An inventory is basically looking for assets that are either online, right, through either simple things like ping, or if they don't ping, then you're going to go straight into the next step, which is UDP and TCP ports. Then the next thing is you look at banner grabbing to identify what type of assets they have on that network, but also to quantify potential high risk ports that are enabled on your network. Because it could be as simple like if somebody puts a sniffer on your network and you have Telnet environment on, that's all clear text traffic, which is username and passwords being sent back and forth. FTP is the same thing, right? Yep. Identifying all these weak areas. But also to be able to convert those assets or those targets into types of devices, OS-based to network-based to IoT to, if I'm able to read SNMP, all that type of information, so you can correlate that up and then look at saying, okay, I can now take that to the next level and actually take those IPs that I've discovered that are assets and now do a vulnerability scan against them to see, are they vulnerable? Is it that from an attack surface standpoint of the bird's eye view, I haven't got any credentials yet, to make sure that if a hacker's sitting on that network, what can they potentially see? Because they haven't sent off any alerts yet by looking at credentials and trying to brute force their way in. They're looking to saying, okay, I'm on the network, I'm stealth. I just want to go out and do some IP scans of IPs that I've discovered that are active with ports. I want to now go and verify to see what vulnerabilities they are before I potentially could exploit them. And now I'm on the network. By simply doing that tool is that you're taking those first three things, discovery, enumeration, vulnerability mapping, and then potentially looking at the risk picture before you deploy any agent-based type of solution, your RMM or anything of that nature that collects next level up information, because now it's on the asset and other things like that. Right. You've got to get the bird's eye view and constantly keep that up. It's kind of like the asset inventory. It doesn't matter if you do it in Excel or whatever. It's having something that's at your fingertips that you can review, import that in, and build a picture from that. The same thing externally, right? And I tell people that, like, if you do an external stuff, you don't need to be an expert on being hacking, right, to do attack surface, right? You don't need to be an expert. If you understand the domain and how domains work without roughly doing DNS, you can actually take advantage of the transparency logs that SSL certificate authorities have to use and pass around to everybody, right? Because it talks about expiration dates. That is the quickest way to identify what subdomains are that website or that domain had before you even touch DNS.
Okay.
So all these things that you're aware of and you can do very quickly without having to be an expert, be a pen test mindset, be a hacker. It's looking at things that are already at your fingertips.
I mean, because otherwise we're talking about out of sight, out of mind. And it's just,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And, you know, we're talking about misconfigurations. We're talking about dormant accounts, unpatched apps. You know, what's something that, you know, something that MSP should start doing this week, like right now? They should drop everything and jump into.
If they were to do anything, what I would do would be as simple as this. To start off with is really truly see if their RMM tool has a asset inventory process. Okay. What exactly does that mean? Does it have the ability that I can set an agent to scan the network to give me feedback of information that's on my network? switches,
Okay.
routers, firewalls, anything that has an IP potentially on there. The number two is to look at, can I print out a report on my apps that are installed on my customer's network? Okay. So I can potentially look for potential high risk issues, such as remote access, right? Gaming, okay? Dev tools or exploit tools. And once you've kind of looked at that, then you can kind of see if there's any potential areas of risk around those things and quantifying that. Then the next thing is to look at how well are we actually patching our third-party applications. We're doing a great job on patching OS because that's what RMMs are really good at, is patching operating system based. They do a very poor job when it comes to third party, right? So how do we make sure that our third party patching is done? But also looking at our network switches, right? People tend to forget that, right? There's crossbleed. You can have VLANs. There's things like that. How well are we updated on the firmware? Does the RMM tool have the ability to go in, whether that's SSH or HTTPS, get the firmware, make sure it's on the latest firmware, right?
Yep.
And making sure that I'm taking note of configuration standards, right? Because what times will happen is if we don't document a firewall port being open, you never know how to close it if you don't not aware of it, right?
Right.
And has there been a change in the system or configuration? But the first thing is looking at the tools that you have and what are the capabilities that that tool can give you that broadens the horizon of just simply deploying an agent on the workstations and then going from there. Because, like you said, out of sight, out of mind. Because how do I know, like, say, for example, if the organization is going through a 401k audit, okay, then you could have PwC, you could have somebody else coming in, and sometimes they like to bring their own devices to interconnect with each other. And they plug into your internet to get outside to the internet. Are you aware that that's actually happening? Are you able to see that that rogue device is connected to your network?
Right.
Are you looking at the information that Meraki or whatever you're using for a managed switch and firewall environment is giving you on a regular basis? Identifying these things. Because if you don't, then you're missing a big portion of potential risk because you're just focusing on the availability of systems and not the confidentiality and the integrity of other areas of the environment that could cause a problem. What if that, that firm or whatever, and I'm not saying you do, but what happens if they get compromised and then they're compromised, they're already past your firewall, they're on your network.
Yeah.
How are they not exfilled? How do you know they're not taking data off one of your file shares and storing it and then walking out the front door? You're not aware of what data is being exfilled, right? So are you using technology, using the defense in depth to say that, am I monitoring what's happening at the perimeter level to see what's coming in and going out? Am I also identifying what's truly on my network? Am I making sure I'm doing an inventory of that on a regular basis? Weak ports. All these things seem like very overwhelming, but a lot of tools actually have that built into them that you should be able to take advantage of it from day one to give you a bigger picture rather than saying the attack surface is really external. You also have it internal, because then all of a sudden, if you want the apps, am I tied into Salesforce, HubSpot? All these different types of external solutions that connect internally are also connected externally, which means they're on both sides of the fence.
Well, human nature is when things are overwhelming like that, we tend to shy away from them, which, the last thing that we want to shy away from is, when it comes down to this cybersecurity, if it is overwhelming, it is what it is. And that's what we are paid to do. And we need to embrace it. I mean, just to be blunt, right?
We need to embrace it, but we also need to have a level of accountability, right, on both sides of the fence. There has to be an expectation from the MSP to state that, okay, today you told me it was these 5 applications are your business core applications, okay? That is what we have, and that's what we're going to support,
right?
Okay? You're now telling me you want to add another 7, but you're not giving me any reason why. So there has to be a level of accountability at the business level to provide a reason why they want these additional 7 apps, and for the MSP to come together to say, okay, that's out of scope. That means we have to now add additional service charge to manage those, right? Because now all of a sudden, if you don't and you accept it, then you're accepting any risk that the owner of the business is making to their network, to the environment. So that's why I was saying before about the emerging technologies group that you create with them. You got to look at it from an operational standpoint, look at it from a business standpoint, you look at it from an IT. Once they're all aligned, then no matter what application it is, it's going to be easy to manage because there's a level of expectation on both sides, level of accountability on both sides. So now it reduces the sprawl. It reduces. It's the same thing when I do to tell people to do tabletop sessions. Sit down. You do the same with the emerging technology group tabletop session, saying, "Oh, by the way, do you know that piece of that software that you bought off SourceForge and you think that was the best thing since sliced bread? That has 35 vulnerabilities in it. Do you know that nobody's supporting it right now, but you're still utilizing it for your day-to-day operational stuff?
Yeah.
That's a concern. What happens if somebody exploits that and now we're into the side of the network? We can't fix that, right? So as you identify these things, you need to bring it to their attention by doing the emerging group or a tabletop session. So as you identify these potential attack vectors, you got to either close them down or bring it to their attention and have them sign off and to say, close down, let's look for an alternative solution. Because it's not about you providing the service of availability. It's you providing the confidentiality and integrity. The data that they provide to their customers is up at every time. It's integrity. It's got confidentiality. There's no issues with it. And it's the same thing for the employees as well, that as they connect to data internally, the same triad still exists, and we need to make sure we reduce the potential lateral movements, northwest, southeast, whatever you want to call it, that there's no movement that the bad actor can have if we're not aware of apps, the network, the software that's interconnected networks, whether it's MPLS, VPN, whatever. We need to be aware of where those things are at any given time.
So when we talk about some of those common pain points, those alerts are coming from everywhere. Like you had talked about, the firewall, RMMs, cloud platforms. We have all this different noise. How would you recommend that MSPs tie all this together, all these risk signals, if you will, from multiple sources to drive real action for their clients?
And that is, it's unfortunate. It's building playbooks, right?
Okay.
And playbooks is back in the day, they used to call them triggers and thresholds. If this happened in a certain amount of time, then you need to execute.
Yeah.
But think of it from a business perspective and looking back and saying, okay, let's build it with a tagging system, right? Let's tag it in a way to determine course of action, right? Create a workflow and basically saying, is this an exec level machine or an exec level app? Is this happening? Yes or no? It's your triage, right? Going through the process, and then you build that up. It's the same thing if it's revenue generation. Because if a revenue generation alert comes up and it's somebody that's sitting on the front desk, but a revenue generation alert comes up, which one are you going to focus on quicker? Revenue generation. If it's CEO is under attack because of something, you have somebody at the front desk, you're going to focus on the CEO. Doesn't mean we're taking away the credibility of the front desk person. It's just that a level of focus of where people are at, we need to get at. Because revenue generation is a big thing, not only in business continuity, business resumption, getting back online again, meeting demand, supply and demand of our customers, right? For our clients to manage. So all these things is to create tags and building out a workflow. And it goes back to that group that, whether you call it the risk committee, whether you call it the emerging groups, is building that out together, is that playbook. So now you have a playbook that you theoretically could foundationally create one for all your customers, but then you add to it based on their nuances, their things of how you implement. And that helps you to kind of drive through the noise and allow for the real things to actually happen based on level of escalation that you're already building into the workbook. Because otherwise, you try to answer to every noise, you're just gonna basically switch it off and then ignore everything. And then something does happen, you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know that was happening because I turned off the alerts. But this is what you have to be aware of and doing it based on that. And that's the key thing: is simplicity creates complexity, right? And that's sometimes what happens if you try to be too simple and create complexity. But what you got to look at is categorizing it based on tagging and then putting it through a workflow and building out a workflow. If it's this, yes, this, and then very quickly, you've just not only created a workbook, but you've also created your instant response.
So when we take a look at what MSPs began, we moved away from being reactionary to being
Yeah.
proactive. However, I think there's still an enormous opportunity for MSPs to do a better job at being proactive, right?
Yeah.
Um, and truly being proactive sets yourself apart from the competition. So, with that being said, in your view, what makes proactive cybersecurity, a cybersecurity strategy, a true competitive advantage for MSPs today?
So yeah, so everything you're right. Everything is reactive and shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? In a
Yeah,
situation where something has happened, right? But it's the time and effort that you put into it. It's basically saying to myself, okay, everything is all about resources, time, money, and people. The more
yep,
I invest on being proactive, the less money I earn in margin. Okay. But you got to look at it from a standpoint of your ACV, right? How long can I keep that customer? If I am willing to invest in pre-work in identifying where the potential attack vectors are, I can maintain that, right, and keep that at that
yeah,
reduction level. I'm investing. That's like what do you call it? Passive marketing in a way. I'm investing back in the customer to make sure that we don't have a potential breach and be proactive, identifying where my attack vectors potentially be internally and externally. Constantly doing that, constantly engaging with the customer. That's my way of building that trust and that level of respect with my customer. That I hate to say this, that if somebody tries to come in and do that prospecting, it's going to be hard for them to take away that way from me because I'm
yeah,
investing in making sure that I'm always aware that if you've heard it where Billy Bob's son's being on the network fixing somebody's printer, right? Why is he on the network fixing the printer? Because they would try to do something. But if you're aware of that, then you can go in right afterwards to make sure that nothing was done outside of that realm, right? Because if they're
right,
very coming to you to tell you that that's the case, they've already got trust. If they don't tell you stuff like that, they don't have faith in you as an MSP.
yeah,
Okay. You got to build that trust. You got to invest that time. And instead of looking at everything as being dollars and cents, look at the long game because the long game is the longer you keep that customer, the more revenue generation you're going to generate from that customer rather than looking at a per price, per desktop, per network, and so forth. Because then you're going to get other projects, more cybersecurity work as they start building out their vendor risk management. All these things will come to you as a way of building out. Then from there, then they talk to their peers. Now all of a sudden you've got them as a marketing tool. So that's how
yeah,
you got to look at it: is investing in that pre work, right? It's like you go to the gym and you see it on TikTok and the thing. Oh, I'm taking my protein shake and I'm doing this because they do 2 hours of prep work before a half an hour workout, right? So
right,
that's the
right,
way you got to look at it: is doing the same thing, but you're investing the time so you do not have to spend thousands of dollars after the fact. Okay.
yeah,
Now you're in the pointing the finger situation. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. It was like an Abbott Costello.
yeah,
Who's on first base? Who's on second base? Be successful for them, but be the security office in a box that they don't expect you to be, but you want to be, right? If that
yeah,
makes sense. Because they look at you from a technology standpoint and be there for everything for technology, step up and do things at a CISO level with them. Now all of a sudden they'll see you in a different light, not only from availability, but you're providing other things that you're doing to reduce the attack vector, but also reduction in breach and compromise.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we want them to think of us as a business partner, not an IT partner per
Correct.
se, right?
Correct.
And because that completely separates us from the competition, and the
That is correct.
conversations change drastically. Then, I mean, they're going to start asking us questions that are well outside of IT, and that only
Yeah.
strengthens the relationship. And we've built
Correct.
a friendship.
Correct. But as you start investing the time and effort with them, they're going to have a different mindset. And that is what they need to see: is the new trends, the new things that are happening, that they're not only the ones that are being hit. MSPs are being hit. MSPs are under incredible amount of pressure
Right.
to provide cybersecurity services. Because you see the notes that come out of CISA, the executive branch, by saying, hey, Mr. Customer, you have now got the right to sue your MSP if you feel that there's negligence, right?
Yep.
These are things that are taking place that the MSP has to do their best job. but bring your partners with you along the journey by bringing them to events, even if it's local. Bring them to a local ASCII event. Bring them to an event that you feel will be beneficial to see what you have to go through as well, and for them to understand what the next tech vectors are happening. That they understand that, you know what, I'm glad I got Liam on my side. I'm glad I got Dan on my side, right? Because that makes them sleep at night. Because that's nothing worse when you have a partner or client that's like that said before 2 o'clock in the morning. Why am I paying everything MSP money? Why am I paying Cyrisma all this money when I only see a report?
Absolutely. And so before we wrap, I want to talk a little bit about value. You guys have a 14-day test drive of Cyrisma. What can MSPs expect when they try this out?
Right. Well, I don't like blowing my own trumpet, right? But we are going through a lot of changes, right? In the sense of adding new functions and features to kind of do what we just discussed, right? In the last 30 minutes or so. And that is giving them information both internally and externally over the next month or so. With that 14 days, they're going to be able to see what's externally facing to them, map that to internal, look at their internal vulnerability stuff. So be exciting over the next couple of weeks what you see coming out of Cyrisma. Coming in June, you'll see some new features as well, which we're very excited about. And that's why Attack Surface is coming very, very passionate and from an inside perspective for Cyrisma, and we're really wanting to push that into the platform as we emphasize that. But yeah.
And you just rolled out a new centralized attack surface dashboard, right?
From a vulnerability standpoint, yes, we have. And then we'll be doing that from other areas as well. We're just getting ready to kind of map out some new functions and features around. I didn't want to say it, but AI, but let's not talk about that, right? Because a lot of people think we're taking jobs away. No, we're not. We're actually advancing because we want the MSPs to look like rock stars. That's basically what we want to do. Because sometimes MSPs don't have the resources to be cybersecurity experts. They rely on the tools to give them the direction of where they need to go to. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with Cyrisma, is to give them the direction. But we are going to really hone in on what we are about, which is simplicity. So there's some new things that are coming out that's going to really drive that home.
And I mean, and let's face it here too, when we talk about differentiating ourselves from the competition, if we as MSPs do not embrace AI and we do not embrace our vendors that are leveraging AI, somebody else will. And we want to be the first, right?
Correct.
So,
And one of the key things that I always recommend people to do is make sure you have a voice with your vendors, because your vendors need to be able to hear what you say is going on in your world. Doesn't mean that it's not going on in other MSPs' world as well. Because 9 times out of 10, if you're having the problem, majority of your peers in your community in the same MSP are suffering the same thing. So always make sure that you have your point across, because especially from a Cyrisma standpoint, we love to hear from what our partners have to say, good, bad, or indifferent, because we always want to evolve, and that's one of the things about Cyrisma. We're always evolving based on feedback and requests from our partners.
I appreciate your time and knowledge. And if you're ready to reduce the noise, find real risk, and show your clients true value, check out Cyrisma's free test drive. You can go directly to cyrisma.com to learn more. Of course, if you are on the everythingmsp.com website, you can search Cyrisma and learn more as well. Liam, thank you again. Until next time, everybody, keep stacking your wins and securing what matters. And we will talk to everybody soon. Take care.
Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Stack.